Okay, thank you very much. Before we transition to the second panel, there was a kind request from the audience because the way that the architecture is set up, it does look a little formal, and there was actually a reason for that, and I want to make sure that we kind of recognize the intent and also to make it a little bit less formal by acknowledging why the tables are set up the way they are. And if you could kind of think back in terms of the intent as to why we're all convened today, it really is multiple things. One, of course, is partnerships and relationships in the Columbia River Basin, but it's also really, the work is about the Columbia River Treaty and the renegotiation of that treaty and what that looks like. And although there are many, many nations at play and that are particularly involved in the modernization process, there was, when it comes down to it, the treaty, when it was first written, was signed by the United States and Canada. And as it's being renegotiated right now, the peoples whose desk, no pressure to the negotiators, no, but it's on the desks of Canada and the United States right now to review. And so what we wanted to do was provide the opportunity, and I really want to in particular thank Brian Dougherty for feedback on how this process could be useful to the process that's going to be happening in Ottawa and Washington, D.C. And so with that, I want to formally acknowledge the U.S. Department of State and Global Affairs Canada for being here and for being active listeners to take these words forward. And had protocol allowed it, I would have made them witnesses as well, but they know that they are witnesses to this work and they actively agreed to be part of that. So I want to thank Brian Dougherty, who's been is a lead negotiator in the United States State Department, Brian Nafziger, who's also been working with Brian, and Cynthia Kirst for their good work. On the Canadian side, I want to acknowledge Gregory Lemmermeyer, who we heard from, and Patrick Higgins, who's been in this work for a long time. And thank you for representing the Canadian Consulate in Seattle. So with that, I just wanted to make sure that you know why these folks are up here. They're good students. They're sitting in the front of the row, and they're going to take their notes back to their offices. So with that, the first panel, I think really the opening allowed us to contextualize why we're doing this work, and it was a very deliberate process when the planning committee decided how we were going to split the responsibilities. I think unanimously we said that we wanted to start on Lummi Nation so that we could properly welcome our tribal leaders and First Nations community members up and down the Columbia River Basin, but also throughout the Coast Salish territory and other nations that are represented. So with that, I really want to open up the floor and thank the panelists that are going to be speaking on the First Nations perspective of the modernization and of the Columbia River Treaty and the history. And so I'm going to say this in the closing remarks too on the second day when I'm visiting at Western with you, but I also poignantly want to point out that when the treaty was first negotiated, at that time, and that historic moment, is also the time that our dear friend Billy Frank Jr. was being arrested at the banks of the Nisqually River for fishing in his traditional territory. And the reason I bring that up is because I want us to remember the time and place when that treaty was made. It's a very different time. And I want us to take that forward, and the work that they are doing right now, all of us, is recognizing that how do we go from there to here, right? And so this is part of that work. So with that, Pauline Terbasket is going to be our first speaker, and then we have Nicole Capel, D.R. Michelle, John Cyrus, and Ron Supa. And let me make sure that I get your affiliations correct. Sorry, all my notes here. So Pauline Terbasket is the Executive Director of the Okanagan Nation Alliance. Nicole Capel is Tnuxa National Council Environmental and Archaeological Stewardship Manager. D.R. Michelle is part of the Colville Tribe and the Upper Columbia United Tribes, as well as his colleague and friend John Cyrus, who's also part of the Upper Columbia United Tribes. And Ron Supa is the Vice Chairman of the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. So with that, please welcome our second presenters.
White Haskell Halt Isqueast Sukawikist. My name is Pauline Terbasket. I'm a Syilx woman, administrator of our tribal council from the Southern Okanagan, Southern Interior of British Columbia. Jay Johnson presented a great overview of our territory earlier on in the first panel. Gave a broad perspective of our Indigenous circumstances in respect to BC and the feds and the treaty renewal process and negotiation. I've been involved in our people's advocacy and assertions of our title and rights probably since I've been born. I've been working in First Nations politics and government organizations all my life, and the last 20 years with our tribal council. Our office is in West Bank, British Columbia. I need to provide a perspective from myself that's really important. And what that importance is that we're on Lummi territory, and my gratitude to the warm welcoming of the people here on this beautiful land. The extended invitation for us to be together, to hear one another, to respect one another, to learn from one another, to perhaps get a bit of a better understanding of what the Columbia River Treaty means to us as peoples. And as for myself, my perspective and what drives my work and my passion in this work. I think it's really important that I wore a pink shirt today. That's important, right? So you can all see me. Part of advocacy in many ways in Canada, I don't know if it's the same down here, is that it's Wear Pink Shirt Day. And it's to end bullying of our children. And so what does that have to do with the Columbia River Treaty? Well, I know there's a lot of bullying going on at a lot of tables. And those are tough conversations that we need to acknowledge and have, but yet overcome so we can really be present and really hear one another and really understand one another. So our children, our youth, our students that are in this room, that are learning and growing and extending their minds and their hearts and their souls, understand that what we are doing is for them. And the river is a great metaphor for that, the Columbia River. The Columbia River is central to Indigenous peoples. Some refer it to the lifeblood in our universal Indigenous cultures. The water is the lifeblood of all living things. And that's why we care, why we're driven to ensure that our voices, that our leadership have a role in this negotiation, in this renegotiation, if that's what it is, of something very sacred to our peoples. And what was coming up earlier in the panel and the closing comments by Barb and around salmon, and talking about salmon and fish passage, and the environmental and the habitat and the restoration needs and the mitigation, and regarding water flows and flood risk, and it's a lot, it's very complex. But that one river for us from the Okanagans, and I can say this for all of the tribes up and down the river, whose familiar faces that I see in the audience. We've been at these forums a long time. We've been advocating for our tribes, for our children, for our lands, for our resources for a long time, because of some of the injustices that were mentioned earlier. We weren't part of the original Columbia River Treaty. We've had to use the courts. We've had to use civil disobedience. We've had to use, what our ancestors have told us to do. Pick up those responsibilities and get involved. And so, yes, I may be an administrator. I may be an administrator of an organization, but we're all leaders. We all must take a responsibility in this work, because as previous speakers mentioned, we're all impacted by it. We're all impacted by whatever that outcome is, and we want to have some say, and we want to have some influence. For Indigenous peoples, we have a right to that. The governments have an obligation to that right, to hear our input and our direction and and manage those expectations. So with the impacts, with the potential, with the capacity, with the opportunity that presents these dialogue sessions, these conferences, it's so important to show up and to become aware and to become informed and to use your voice, to use whatever you need to use to advocate for the safeguard of our water and our lands and our salmon, primarily, especially for Indigenous peoples. It's central, always has been. It's the core of who we are. And for our communities, and many of the leaders have shared this before, it's empowering. It's reuniting our people. It's having our youth being inspired about their identity, having a place, having a purpose, having a reason to set goals and to be grounded in who they are as Indigenous people that'll pick up these responsibilities. It's our responsibility to pass that on to them. And so, yes, we must continue to be advocates. We must continue to be leaders. I mean, I just look around at all of you and I think this tremendous amount of intellect, the tremendous amount of passion, the tremendous amount of commitment in this room. And all I ask, and in that role and in that leadership, that you know and hear and be inclusive of all voices as it comes to the river, the Columbia River especially. We've been involved. This discussion has involved many forums, and people have picked it up. I've been involved in supporting youth that are starting their own networks, women that are starting, storytelling circles about place and space in which where their homes are around the river, the history of that place and space. We've been involved in the forum called One River Ethics Matter. Some of my friends I see in the audience from those forums about our ethical responsibilities in ensuring that we have clean water and access to water, and that our salmon have passage, and that we're responsible stewards for not only for today but for the future, that we have that right, that we can do that here on Turtle Island, that we can stand up and work together as partners, as collaborators, as strategists, as politicians, as leaders of every kind. We can all do that together. That river is sacred. That river is our connection, our sacred connection to each other. And from our ancestors and well into the future, and for those generations to benefit from as well. I look around this community. My family were avid basketball players. They're athletes. They travel down here a lot. Intermarried. I have family in Nisqually. I want to thank Emma for acknowledging my friend Billy Frank Jr. and all his work. We're all here to pick up that work. We're all here. He wants us to be here. Our past tribal leaders want us to be here. That's why we're here. With that, I want to say Limlimt.
Kisukikit, everybody. I have a slideshow that will be going up, so I'll give it a few seconds, and just want to first of all say thank you to the Lummi people for hosting us, and thank you to the Tribal College for also having us here and inviting me to come and speak. And I think I'm also sitting on a panel tomorrow, which should be fun. My name is Nicole Capel. As was said before, I am the Environment and Archaeological Stewardship Manager for the Chinook Nation Council, which is located in Cranbrook, British Columbia. There's my title in Tunuka, which one day I will be able to pronounce perfectly, but not yet. And my contact information. So next slide, please. So the KNC is the governing body of the Chinook Nation within Canada, and I just have put up a bit of a map here just to show that the homelands of Chinook span the Kootenay and Columbia River systems in what is now British Columbia, Alberta, Montana, and Idaho. I just wanted to point out that the communities of the Chinook Nation are listed in black there, and you can see the Columbia and Kootenay River systems form a circle kind of in that area. The headwaters of the Columbia River are located at Columbia Lake, which is just south of the Tunuka community of Akiskanook. And the Columbia and Kootenay River systems, as you can see from the map prior, they are an integral part of the Tunuka creation story, and therefore they are a part of the foundation of who Tunuka people are. So as was mentioned, when the CRT was negotiated and signed and ratified, it was a very different place in Canada. And at this time, the Tunuka Nation was not consulted, nor were they considered when these negotiations were happening. And so in Canada at that time, I just did a little bit of digging, wanted to get my dates correct, but Indigenous people could not, in some cases, could not leave their reservations in the 1950s and 60s without a pass, without permission. They could not hire a lawyer to pursue land claims, nor could they hold festivals or large gatherings without permission until 1951. And they were only unilaterally granted the right to vote within Canada in 1960. And so that was the time period in which the Columbia River Treaty was being negotiated. So the next slide is going to show Duncan Reservoir during drawdown, which is pretty devastating, and I wanted to talk a bit about impacts. So the CRT has many negative impacts to Tunuka Nation, and the creation of the Duncan Arrow Lakes and Mica reservoirs, as well as the Libby Reservoir, flooded thousands of hectares of land, destroyed important wetland and riparian habitat, created lakes where there once were river habitats, and also destroyed many cultural heritage sites and archaeological sites, and ensured the continued extirpation of anadromous salmon to Tunuka homelands. So that being said, for many, many years, Tunuka Nation have engaged with their citizens and worked, the KNC as a council has worked to try to gather interests and articulate what those interests are from the citizens, and try to work with those interests and develop them into principles for working with the other governments around looking at the Columbia River Treaty. And some of those interests of the Tunuka Nation Council are that the KNC continue to exercise the nation's stewardship responsibilities and participate in CRT decision-making. That we participate in and achieve restoration of anadromous salmon into the upper Columbia River. That we participate in, oversee, and achieve protection of cultural heritage sites. That ecosystem management and function is a co-equal purpose of the renewed treaty. that the Libby Dam and Kookanusa Reservoir are brought within a co-management regime between nations that includes the Chinook Nation. I really enjoyed what Jay Johnson said earlier about redress of historic and ongoing impacts of the reservoirs, of the dams and the associated reservoirs. That, again, Jay mentioned this too. I thought, man, we're doing the same presentation. No. Chinook Nation are also very keen on participating in economic benefits from the treaty. And finally, one that has been mentioned many times from citizens is the mechanism incorporated into the treaty or into a renewed treaty that would address climate change issues. And so our work on the Columbia River Treaty renewal and review has included, because of those interests that were articulated, it has included developing and participating in a lot of initiatives to try to flesh out those interests and develop those principles. Some of those projects include collaboration on salmon reintroduction efforts, working with other nations as well as British Columbia Hydropower on archaeological assessment and cultural heritage management within the reservoirs, participating in an ecosystem-based function technical working group, and also participating in a collaborative modeling working group. Those are just some of the work that we do to try to like I said, to try to flesh out those interests of the Chinook Nation and understand what they are and understand what a renewed Columbia River Treaty could look like if it met these interests. And so finally, moving forward, the KNC excuse me, will be fully participate in shaping a renewed Columbia River Treaty. And the focus of that will be in meeting the interests of the nation and its citizens. And they see this participation as a small part of, or a small aspect of overarching stewardship responsibilities in the Columbia River Basin. Thanks.
Again, my name's D.R. Michelle. I'm a member of the Colville tribe. I'm a Snipes Arrow Lake descendant, so my ancestors, the Kettle Falls, Arrow Lakes areas where my people came from, and part of the reason why this is so important to us going forward. I'd also like to thank the Lummi Nation and Northwest Indian College and Western Washington University for the invitation. It's an honor to be here today with all of you guys. Again, UCUT is the Coeur d'Alene Tribe, Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation, the Kalispel Tribe of Indians, the Kootenai Tribe of Idaho, and the Spokane Tribe of Indians. We work for nearly 15,000 tribal members in what we call the blocked area. Again, it's already been said, but the salmon and all of those issues related to that were taken from us with the construction of Cooley Dam, and then with the construction with Chief Joe, which I'll talk about here later on. Our mission statement is to unite the Upper Columbia River tribes for the protection, preservation, and enhancement of treaty, executive order rights, sovereignty, culture, fish, water, wildlife, habitat, and other interests and issues of common concern in our respective territories through a structured process of cooperation and coordination for the benefit of all people. And I think the last part of our mission statement is unique in that we work for all people. During the sovereign review process, there was an attempt to kind of make these ecosystem function and fish passage and some of these other issues, tribal issues. The tribes want fish passage, the tribes want ecosystem. And we had to push back really hard. That's not true. These are all of our issues. Everybody who lives in the basin, recreates in the basin, irrigates, any of those uses, they're all of our issues. And going forward, we need to keep that in mind, because these things impact and benefit all of us. A little more about UCUT. Together we manage and influence 2 million acres of reservation lands, 14 million acres of Aboriginal territories, 500 miles of waterways, 40 interior lakes, and 30 dams and reservoirs. Again, for the benefit of all people. There was a lot of background and history about the Columbia River Treaty, but basically it was developed to regulate, generate power, and reduce flood risk management. Cooley isn't part of the isn't a treaty dam, but it's the linchpin in the U.S., so it's used largely to regulate those flows out of Canada into the U.S. So adding ecosystem function was a big important task for the tribes to get done, and there's been a lot of talk about what ecosystem is or what it might look like, and to me or to us it's more of a coordinated operations. So it shouldn't be us and them. It shouldn't be Canadian benefits and U.S. benefits. It should be benefits up and down the system. So that's the way we approach it. And again, for the benefit of all, is fish passage just doesn't benefit the tribes. It'll benefit anglers, and again, we'll talk a little bit about some of those economics a little farther into the presentation. Construction of the treaty dams basically moved those floods permanently from downriver to upriver, negatively impacting First Nations and tribes, our homelands, our culture, our way of life. This picture is of the Spokane Arm at the Columbia River, the mouth of the Spokane. So this first flood, our first picture was the river where it went into the Columbia as it was coming up. The next picture shows that bridge going underwater, and the last picture shows that bridge is underwater. It's under 30 feet of water now, and again, that's the mouth of the Spokane River. And flood risk management, part of the big picture for us and concern is getting a flood risk management review going. Currently, it's important for the tribes to get a flood risk management study going because the flood at Vanport was used to justify the construction or the process of implementing the treaty. If you look at this realistically, the Vanport flood event under current circumstances cannot be protected. So this was a rain-on-snow event in the U.S. These current treaty dams would not have been able to protect this event. So there's a need to do a flood risk management review that looks at all of those current scenarios with climate change and impacts, and how the system is currently changing before our eyes, so to speak, with what's happening out there, and you know where we are currently is good examples of what's going on with all the rains in California and the infrastructure there, that Odessa Dam and all of the issues around that. Again, it's they kicked the can down the road. 10, 15 years ago, they were told there was issues with those spillways, and they didn't do anything about it. So it's kind of like here we are again. We've got an opportunity to modernize the treaty and look at all of those aspects. Again, not for U.S. benefits downriver or Canadian benefits upriver, but for all of us to benefit from the development of the hydro system, for flood protection, for ecosystem. It doesn't have to be either or. We can provide all of those other uses and still provide ecosystem function and fish passage. 15 tribes seeing these opportunities and the importance of going forward, set aside a lot of upriver, downriver differences, and again, looked at the system more as a whole. And there's a lot of information on our website and our Facebook page with links to the Joint Fish Passage paper, the Common Views document. A lot of these things were developed amongst the 15 tribes and the First Nations, coordinating those issues. Again, ecosystem doesn't have to be complicated. Again, it's just a coordinated operation between the U.S. and Canada, where what you do downriver shouldn't negatively impact us upriver, and vice versa. And moving those floods permanently from down in Portland up into our neck of the woods, those folks down there that receive all of the benefits currently don't pay anything. They don't feel the effects. They don't pay for any of those benefits that all of us upriver pay for on a daily basis, with the loss of our culture, our salmon, our ecosystems, our lands, it was mentioned our ancestors, our cemeteries. All of that stuff's being affected on a daily basis with the development of the system. I got the X up here, so I'm gonna jump to a couple of quick. Fish passage, a very important part of the renegotiations. There's a lot of new technology, whoosh, floating surface collectors that allows us to look at fish passage in ways that we haven't had to in the past. Whoosh is a relatively inexpensive way of getting adults over high head dams. They're doing a lot of studies that show that's feasible. Floating surface collectors are being used all over the region and in areas where getting juveniles back down the system is important. And they're floating surface collectors, so they go up and down with the reservoir, so they have very little impact on flood risk management. They use very little water and very little power to work them. I'm going to just touch a little bit on the economics real quick, and folks saying we can't afford to do it. There's Okanagan, the Okanagan River in that sockeye run. In the early 2000s, that run was down to like 2,500 fish. In the last few years, it's been up over 500,000-600,000. The little town in Brewster went from nearly zero angler days in the early 2000s to over 16,500 angler days in 2014. They estimate an angler will spend an average of $90 a day. So there's a huge economic part of this system that we currently don't talk about or don't utilize. Our focus is on flood risk management and power production, and there's a huge economic opportunity in returning the salmon and including ecosystem function. And it's about priorities, folks. And there was a post on our Facebook that talked about we can look for water on Mars, but we can't get a fish over a dam. It's priorities, and we've got an opportunity with the negotiations of this treaty to change those priorities, to provide all of those things that we talked about. So I'll turn it over to John.
I also introduce myself in Cha Squeesai I and Cha Kan Sukanakil Nathan Pesquaus. Okanagan and Wenatchee. I'm from the Colville Indian Reservation. I work for the Upper Columbia United Tribes as a committee coordinator, working on a lot of these issues. And I too say, White Limlimt, thank you to the Lummi people for allowing us to gather here on their lands. And I want to thank each and every one of you for being here and listening and participating in this process. We're very passionate about this issue because it is a part of our culture, and I'm going to attempt to give you this broad overview of what we see going forward, both scientifically, but also culturally, and also looking at what can we do individually, and it really revolves around for us our cultural ways. We see that climate change is impacting fish right now. As I listen to all these speakers and things keep popping in my head. I'm like, trying to keep focus on what I have to say. Empataq, the big river, is what joins all of us, indigenous people, along this entire area. We traveled through this river by canoe. We made treaties. So I wanted to respectfully correct Richard in a way. The most successful treaty that up and down this river was by First Nations, First Peoples. We had our salmon chiefs made agreements with one another. We spread out those benefits to one another because we knew that we all depended on that salmon run. We had to take care of them in our way, and I'll talk about it a little bit later. The four chiefs that sacrificed themselves, gave their lives for us. In turn, we have to take care of them. We have to take care of their water. We have to take care of their homes. So it's with that charge that calls us to action, that calls us here. And it's been said many times that water needs our attention. So we have examples of treaties that can work. and we can use and learn from those past examples to better inform and direct our actions toward a new treaty between these two countries and our first indigenous peoples. Go ahead to the next one. Current and future impacts of the fish and environment. At UCUP, we're working on developing more knowledge around climate change, developing adaptation plans, and that also relates back to our first foods, our environment. When I say culture, and a lot of people refer to Native people, your culture is so beautiful. Our culture is applied science over thousands of years. There's reasons why we harvest fish at a certain time. There's a reason why we use cedar. It's the biological aspects of that particular plant that has pesticides. There's a lot of knowledge that's built into that culture that's applied science. So when we talk about using climate change and looking at the science, we embrace that with both arms, because that is going to prove all the things that we've been trying to share. So go to the next one. Traditional knowledge is direction. So that is something that once you're in touch with that river, once you're in touch with those first foods, you understand that the time to harvest has moved up dramatically, 20, 30 days in some cases. Those foods, those things that are out there are telling us, they're giving us messages, you have to change your ways because things are changing. We have to listen to those messages, and we have to listen and make those changes. So go ahead and go to the next one. And, part of that, floods are natural. They're a natural part of our world, and we need to embrace that as well. Trying to artificially prevent floods from happening is not a smart idea. It's not a long, sustainable idea. So part of the future is this picture right here. We see a fishery above those dams. We see, our voices need to be heard in this process. Our foods, our waters, our ways, they are to be protected. There are treaties that predate the Columbia River Treaty that guarantee our foods, our rights, our waters to our people on these lands. So those predated treaties need to be respected and taken into account in this treaty process. Go to the next one. It's been talked about before, our traditional responsibility. We've had to take care. It's an honor that we love and we cherish, being stewards of the land. And it's our responsibility to take care of them. And it's been talked about before, so a lot of the stuff, I'm glad, has been covered. UNDRIP is now a mechanism that allows nation states to respect and engage First Nations, Indigenous peoples, tribal governments in a way that's meaningful, free, prior, informed consent. We need to work to strive every day toward that. Go to the next one. So our objectives for Fish Passage are not only cultural, they're scientific, they're based in fact. Climate change shows us that water temperatures, water quality, water quantity is going to change. We need to get those salmon, for all of us to enjoy salmon, we need to get those salmon up into the Canadian reaches where they have habitat that they can spawn and produce that can provide for us all. We are one with this river. So I heard Pauline talk about One River Ethics Matter. That is a multi-religious national group that's coming together. We have, religious groups from all over that are joining and saying we need to interact with this in a different way, and we need to come together in a better way. Go to the next one, and I'm almost done. We've produced a couple of videos. Keep going through that. Hopefully we can share this out. There's some really, really awesome movements that show people getting awareness and growing. Go to the next one. It's all about collaborative actions, coming together with a respectful tone to really encourage people to hear and listen to those voices. Go to the next one. And the last kind of, you can go all the way to the end. We need to change that narrative of the story. Instead of it's like, these humans, they've messed things up. We can change that story to how can we come together to figure out what is befuddling us all, whether it's the Columbia River Treaty or addressing climate change and creating a better future for our future generations. We can come together and be the heroes of that story rather than being always the negative, like the man is always doing this bad. So that's what I want to leave you with, is that we can come together, we can change the story, and it's time for us to do it. Way Limlimt.
Yeah, boys. You guys took all my speech, so I got nothing to say. Nech Wachway, Winichus, Achai, Tichum, Natitat, Taich, Tiluxni, Daxbus, Enchiwana, Talapushek, Tamadwilla, Kwaala, Aki. My IT guy, my nephew, Jonathan Smith up there, my PowerPoint, he had a whole bunch of pictures of a bunch of pretty girls, so I don't think we could use that one for this presentation today. My other nephew, McConville over there, I want to encourage those young men to step forward now, just as my elders drug me along and tried to teach me the way. Now my two nephews here are here with me today to witness and to learn about business with other governments. Today, probably the best message I could give to you guys is in a song from my way of life, and I'd like to maybe just sing one verse of that so you guys can understand that the Indian still has his voice, and that we're here today to visit with you guys and hopefully communicate with you so that we can start erasing the prejudices and the paradigms that seem to confront us each time that we talk business with the tribes and the other nations. I don't have much of a voice, but I guess we'll give it a whirl. Atko shakana wakan chua champam hey ana chakuma anaknuisha lachai pishamicham yam hey oh yanawata Chukanawata hey hey. When we were placed on this land, the Creator gave us a voice, and He gave us everything that we would need to sustain ourselves where He put us. And as I relive the history of my people, the Warm Springs tribe, we spread all the way from the mouth of the Columbia River clear up to and across the Canadian border. And the common linkage between the nations, the Indian nations, is the language. You talk to somebody in our language from Colville to Warm Springs, even though it's a different dialect, they understand each other. You talk to somebody from the Nekiawi up in Pendleton with Warm Springs, they understand each other because we speak the same language, and we can communicate. You speak to the Nemepu up in Nez Perce in our language, and they understand each other too. So the different dialects do not prohibit us from being good people. Today, I think I've been out of this process for about 5 years now, and I'm stepping back in. But my message I'd like to start with today is goes along the lines of the basic question of, do we want to renew the treaty, the Columbia River Treaty, yes or no? And in Warm Springs' response, it's yes. So we will send our people to where they need to be to conduct the business and look out for our interests. Equal footing is important to the tribes because each tribe is sovereign. Each tribe is unique. And each tribe has a voice, and they like to speak up for themselves when we're talking business, important business such as this. I think that we have to develop a certain level of trust, and that can only come through processes such as collaboration. And I think that when you talk about the Columbia River, no matter where it goes, it's a way of life. It's our homelands. It's where we're from. We're here. We're not going anywhere. And we're going to participate in this process whether we're welcome or not, because we have to honor our word to the Creator when He put us here, that He'll give us these things to sustain ourselves. But the promise that we made back to Him was that we will look out and take care of those things forever. That way they'll always be there for us. I think that equal footing also applies to the tribal leaders. Respect them. They're coming to you. They don't have their hat in their hand. They're not asking you for anything. What's out there was always ours. Secondly, please trust our experts, our attorneys, our consultants, because they're advising us and they're giving us the best advice that they can. And we're going to pack that forward, maybe in a layman's terms, but we're going to do it. When we worked our treaty, my people then did not speak English, and they negotiated out a treaty, and we still live by that treaty, and we haven't abrogated it. So with that, the federal government owed a certain amount of trust responsibility and a fiduciary responsibility to our tribes, because each of us tribes, we have ceded a lot of land to this nation. We gave it to them, and that was kind of like the payment for the services that we get back. So our rationale is that you still owe us, so please honor your word too. I guess as we evolved through this process, in 2009, they formed the 15 tribe coalition to begin talking about the Columbia River Treaty. Some products that came from that were the Common Views, which came out in 2010. The definition for eco-based came out, and probably the biggest thing that came out was the regional recommendation. So I think that the tribes and the other entities put a lot of work into developing those things. And I don't think that we excluded anyone from participating in the process. So I appreciate all of the nations that work together. Probably something that's different about me is that we talk about entitlement. And I think that maybe we ought to consider maybe two things. And I know they're probably not acceptable to everyone because all of the river users and blah, blah, blah have their interests. But one, I concur with the power entities that the entitlement amount is too high and too steep and needs to be renegotiated and brought down to a lower level. But on the other hand, too, the savings that we negotiate, then I think that we should maybe create a fund that could possibly help us ask the two national governments, the U.S. and Canadian government, to share the costs of maybe paying for those eco-based functions that we're talking about here, so that we're not just going in with an open-ended agreement. The future, in visiting with Elliot a couple days ago, we both were concerned about the State Department federal positions not being filled and being empty. We're concerned about also in the Department of Energy that all of those employees are pretty much gone. The Tribal Energy Division, which we worked so hard for to put into place and to get an annual budget for, is almost gone too. So I think that we really need to pay attention to what the Trump administration is doing, because when they start throwing words around like modernizing ESA, that gets scary to the tribes, because all of our interests are tied back to the treaties, the executive orders, and whatever else kind of agreements we have. And the guarantee that we have is that there's a fair, equitable process to do all of this stuff. Brian's, I thank you guys for being here. It was good to see you guys a couple weeks ago over in DC. I appreciate you guys taking the time and being on the front line and taking the time to visit with us. With that, a lot of my relatives tell me I talk too damn much, so I'll end at that point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I really want to extend the thanks to Ron Supa for the beautiful song. I think it really brought some beautiful energy into the room, so thank you, Ron. In the interest of just making sure that we have a couple of questions, making sure we open up space for a couple of questions, I know we have our snacks and our coffee and tea ready for us, and we have a little bit of wiggle room in our panel, so rest assured we'll be okay for our salmon dinner. But I do also want to just make sure that we leave room to ask some questions. You guys raised some beautifully important points, and I think bringing nicely together with the first panel. So with that, I'm going to just open it up to the floor for a couple of questions.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Graham Lee Rollins. I'm a researcher from Quest University in Squamish, BC. I want to bring up something that came up in the last panel, which is the issue of who is responsible for the loss of salmon to the Upper Columbia, and then who might be responsible for potentially restoring it. As it stands, neither the US nor Canada has taken responsibility for that. The BC decision explicitly says restoration is not a treaty issue. It also says nothing about it being a federal issue. The U.S. also has not taken full responsibility because in the regional recommendations, they say that any restoration project would need to be jointly shared with joint costs with Canada, and so they're not willing to pursue it alone. How do you think that that lack of commitment from the national governments might be resolved?
I'll give the first attempt on that one. It is the federal government's responsibility for the loss of salmon at Grand Coulee. We've got a couple of different processes we can work through. The Columbia River Treaty, the international process that gives us the opportunity to work on both sides of the border. But we also have a domestic process through the Northwest Power and Conservation Council that adopted fish passage in the 2014 amendment process. So we have that domestic process, which in my mind again shows that the federal government is responsible for that loss of salmon. Again, not just to the tribes, but to everybody. So as we go forward, we build those relationships and we work with the federal government. We're working with the counties, states, with First Nations, coordinating on those issues. We're family. The border's separated, and it's hard to explain this whole process to you folks in 10 minutes when it's happened over 200 years, and all of the things, all of the issues that are around why we're sitting where we are today is stories that we could go on for hours, and it's all important, but responsibility and ownership in those responsibilities, I think, is where the tribes shine in that we're not doing this for ourselves today. It's for our future generations. We look 7 generations out, and what we do today impacts those future generations. So that's why I'm, and folks are sitting around the table is working for those future generations, holding those folks accountable, and ourselves accountable for those issues and working through them. Again, it's got to be, it can't be us and them in any of this stuff we're doing. It's got to be us. We've got to quit dividing these things up, managing the river in Canada and in the U.S., and then even farther in that in each reservoir is managed differently and has a different ecosystem, has different effects on the system. So until we all start to look at this thing as ours, these issues are ours, we're responsible for them. Whether it's the federal government, the Canadian government, or the tribes, it's us. It's got to be a we.
Thank you for that question. With the comments that DR just made, the Okanagan Nation Alliance, through our efforts around all together, we've persisted under the leadership of our Chiefs Executive Council mandate to ensure fish passage and salmon reintroduction into the Okanagan Subbasin. Part of that history of being oppressed and colonized as Indigenous peoples, dispossessed, removed from the decision making regarding the impacts that have been shared all this afternoon regarding the impacts on our culture, on our way of life, on our lands, on our peoples, on the relationships with one another. We've been able to persist. We have incredible resiliency like our chief salmon. And with that, a negotiation with the public utility districts of Douglas County and Chelan in northern Washington state, with our relatives at from the Colville Reservation, and the working relation we have in terms of fish habitat between the Colville Confederated Tribes and the Okanagan Nation Alliance on the south side of the 49th. We were able to negotiate a 13-year salmon reintroduction program into the Okanagan Subbasin. That wasn't an easy process. Getting to your question about who's responsible, we're all responsible. Our advocacy is responsible. ending bullying and advocating and wearing pink shirts when possible or orange shirts on Indian Residential School Day is bringing a consciousness and awareness about it is all our responsibilities to do what it takes to protect our river. It's central, it's sacred, and now we have a first-class sockeye, special sockeye salmon hatchery in the Okanagan. And salmon mitigation money, revenue money, did it come out of the CRT? We can say with that certainly those statutes, those legal mechanisms, those agreements internationally, transboundary agreements, the Pacific Salmon Commission, the Pacific Salmon Treaty, is complex. It's as complex as our river and the relationships that are in this room. But we must ourselves be committed to that. So yeah, I'd like to say the government's responsible from an Indigenous perspective. They're responsible. The feds and the province are responsible. No hesitation. But I have to go further. Our people, our leaders are going further to bring forward solutions and resolution. Thank you.
Okay, I know we have amazing more questions, and I know this young gentleman over here has one on burning, but I also know that we need to nourish our bodies. So if we can hold off on that question and take a break, but first of all, I want to thank so much our panelists for a beautiful and thoughtful presentation.